The opulent silence of the Finch manor was a physical presence, a heavy brocade curtain that smothered all sound and joy. It was a silence purchased at great cost, a testament to the man who resided within its cold marble heart. Alistair Finch, at 68, was a man carved from granite and bank ledgers. His name, once whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in financial circles, now seemed to belong to the estate itself, a relic of a bygone era of ruthless acquisitions and hostile takeovers. He was a king, but his kingdom was a mausoleum, and his throne was a high-backed leather chair that faced a fireplace so large and so rarely used it seemed to gape like a hungry mouth. His dream, a secret he would have rather died than confessed, had been simple. A family, a wife who would look at him not with avarice or fear, but with warmth. Children whose laughter would echo in these hollow halls, replacing the monotonous tick of the grandfather clock. It was a dream he had carried since his own bleak, loveless childhood, a single, fragile ember in the freezing vault of his ambition. But the very traits that had built his empire, the unyielding will, the razor-sharp criticism, the utter lack of patience, had proven to be toxic to the delicate ecosystem of love. He was, in a word, rude. It was more than rudeness. It was a fundamental inability to be soft, to be vulnerable, to yield. In his youth, women had been drawn to the magnetic pull of his power and wealth. They saw the tailored suits, the fleet of cars, the private jets, and imagined a life of fairy tale splendor. But the fairy tale always curdled into a nightmare. A dinner date would be cut short because he received a business call, the woman left sitting in silence for an hour. A carefully chosen gift would be critiqued for its lack of taste or its impracticality. A heartfelt opinion would be dismissed with a condescending wave of his hand. He treated potential partners as he did his subordinates. Their purpose was to fulfill a function, and their failure to meet his exacting standards was a mark of their inherent inadequacy. Proposals were never uttered. Relationships withered and died, starved of the basic nutrients of kindness and respect. By the time he was 50, the parade of women had ceased altogether. The dream of a family had fossilized into a bitter internal scar, a constant aching reminder of his profound failure in the one arena that could not be conquered by money. His days settled into a rigid, joyless rhythm. He would wake at precisely 5:15 a.m. His breakfast, a single poached egg and dry toast, would be eaten in solitude at the head of a table that could seat 20. He would then retreat to his study, a room lined with first editions he never read, and stare at financial screens, watching the endless dance of numbers that had long since lost their meaning. The afternoons were for walks through the manicured gardens, his solitary figure a dark stain against the vibrant greens and florals, his mind occupied with thoughts of mergers and acquisitions that were now just ghosts of past glories. The change began, as all great changes do, not with a bang, but with the quiet, almost imperceptible sound of a small footstep. His previous housekeeper had retired, and the agency, after extensive and discreet vetting, had sent Margaret. She was a widow in her late 40s, with a calm demeanor and eyes that held a deep, settled sorrow. She came with a single small suitcase and a smaller shadow, her 5-year-old daughter, Lily. The agency had been explicitly informed of Mr. Finch's disposition. Children were to be neither seen nor heard, but Margaret was desperate, and the pay was triple what she could earn anywhere else. She promised to keep Lily utterly invisible. For the first week, she succeeded. Alistair was only vaguely aware of a faint, melodic humming that sometimes drifted from the kitchen quarters, a sound so foreign to the manor it seemed almost like an auditory hallucination. The first encounter was accidental. Alistair, enraged by a dip in the stock of a company he had long since sold, had stormed out of his study, his face a thunderous mask of fury. He marched into the grand hall, intent on finding some trivial fault with the new housekeeper's work, a target for his impotent rage. And there, on the bottom step of the grand curving staircase, sat a child. She was tiny, a wisp of a thing dressed in a faded yellow dress. A mop of curly brown hair framed a face dotted with faint freckles. In her hands, she clutched a piece of paper and a stubby blue crayon. She wasn't drawing, merely sitting, her large hazel eyes fixed on the colossal crystal chandelier above, her gaze one of pure, unadulterated wonder. Alistair stopped dead. The angry words, "What is the meaning of this?" caught in his throat. The child turned her gaze from the chandelier to him. She didn't startle. She didn't look afraid. She simply observed him, this large, red-faced man with the same calm curiosity she had afforded the sparkling lights. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, she held up her paper. It was a chaotic swirl of blue and green. "It's a dragon," she announced, her voice clear and small, yet it seemed to fill the cavernous space. "He's not angry. He's just lonely, because he's too big to play with the other dragons." The statement, so innocent and so devastatingly accurate, pierced Alistair's heart with the precision of a laser. The air left his lungs. The dragon, lonely, too big. He, Alistair Finch, the terror of Wall Street, had been perfectly diagnosed by a 5-year-old with a crayon. The rage that had been boiling inside him evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, aching shame. Slowly, stiffly, as if his joints were rusted shut, he lowered himself to one knee, ignoring the protest of his aged bones and the expensive fabric of his trousers against the cold marble floor. He reached out and took the drawing. It was, objectively, a mess, but to him it was a profound work of art, a mirror held up to his soul. "I see," he said, and his voice was not the commanding bark he was known for, but a rough, unused whisper. "It's a very good dragon." From that day, a subtle, silent shift occurred in the ecosystem of Finch Manor. Alistair did not become a new man overnight. The rudeness was a deeply ingrained habit, a defense mechanism he had worn for decades. But around Lily, it began to crumble. He found himself orchestrating his movements to catch glimpses of her. He started taking his afternoon tea in the sunroom, which had a direct view of the section of the garden where Lily was allowed to play under her mother's watchful eye. He began with small, seemingly accidental gestures. A beautiful leather-bound sketchbook and a brand-new set of artist-grade colored pencils appeared on a table in the library. A magnificent dollhouse, a relic from a forgotten era of the manor, was discovered in the attic, dusted off, and placed in a corner of the grand hall. He never said a word. He would simply place the object and retreat, watching from a distance as Lily discovered these treasures, her gasps of delight echoing like music. Margaret watched this transformation with a mixture of terror and hope. She had been warned about this man, his temper, his coldness. Yet she saw the way he looked at her daughter, not with annoyance, but with a kind of wistful, hungry fascination. She saw the hard lines of his face soften when Lily, emboldened by weeks of silent gifts, finally approached him directly. "Will you read to me?" she asked one afternoon, holding up a book about a lost kitten. Alistair, who was in the middle of reviewing a complex legal document, looked down at her. The old Alistair would have snapped, "Can't you see I'm busy?" But the man who had been befriended by a lonely dragon simply closed his folder. "Very well," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. He sat in his large armchair, and Lily, without a moment's hesitation, climbed up and nestled into the space beside him, a small, warm weight against his side. As he read, his voice, once used only for commands and criticisms, stumbled at first over the simple, rhythmic sentences. But soon he found a cadence. He did the voices for the kitten and the friendly dog it met. Lily listened, utterly enthralled, her head resting against his arm. This became their ritual. Every day at 4 o'clock, Alistair would stop whatever he was doing, and Lily would arrive with a book. They read about princesses in towering castles and mice who dreamed of flying to the moon. He learned about her world, a world where a ladybug was a trusted messenger and a puddle was a vast ocean to be crossed. He, who had negotiated world-altering deals, now found himself deeply engrossed in serious negotiations with a 5-year-old over the critical matters of how many cookies were permissible before dinner, or whether it was acceptable for a dragon to wear a top hat. The friendship was not one-sided. In Lily, Alistair found a purpose that had been absent from his life for years. He wasn't just a retired millionaire. He was the keeper of the crayons, the reader of stories, the protector of the garden from imaginary trolls. He taught her how to play chess, patiently explaining the moves of each piece, and was secretly thrilled when she began to beat him with surprising strategic brilliance. She, in turn, taught him the names of all the flowers in the garden, not their Latin classifications, but the names she had invented for them. Sunshine bells for the daffodils, pink whispers for the peonies. He learned of her father, a soldier who had died a hero before she was born, a face in a photograph and a story told by her mother. He saw the quiet strength in Margaret, the way she worked tirelessly to provide a good life for her daughter, and a deep respect for her began to grow in him, replacing his previous impersonal employer-employee dynamic. One crisp autumn evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled over the estate. The lights flickered, and the wind howled like a banshee around the stone corners of the manor. Alistair was in his study when he heard a faint, frightened sob from upstairs. He found Lily standing in the doorway of her small room, her little body trembling, her face pale with fear. Margaret was in the west wing, and the sound of the storm had masked her daughter's cries. Without a second thought, Alistair knelt. "It's only the sky having an argument, Lily," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "The thunder is just its loud voice, and the lightning is it turning the lights on and off." She looked at him, her eyes wide with terror and trust. "I'm scared," she whispered. He held out his arms, an invitation he had never extended to anyone in his adult life. She rushed into them, burying her face in his chest. He picked her up, her small limbs clinging to him, and carried her to the large window in the hall. He held her close, pointing out the fantastic shapes the lightning made in the clouds, transforming the terrifying storm into a grand celestial puppet show. He told her a story about a thunder giant who was clumsy and a lightning fairy who was trying to help him find his way home. Her trembling subsided, replaced by fascinated awe. She fell asleep in his arms, her head on his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. He stood there for a long time, holding her, feeling the absolute trust in her weight. He looked down at her peaceful face, the long, dark lashes against her cheeks, the perfect rosebud mouth slightly parted. A feeling surged within him, so powerful it brought tears to his eyes, a sensation he had not felt in over 60 years. It was a fierce, protective, all-consuming love. It was the love of a father. It wasn't a vague desire for a family anymore. It was a specific, burning need to be her father, to be the one she ran to when she was scared, the one she celebrated with when she was happy, the constant, unwavering presence in her life. The poor-spirited millionaire, who had spent a lifetime building walls, had finally found a treasure so precious it made his entire fortune seem like dust. The empty mansion was no longer a mausoleum. It was a home, filled with the latent energy of a child's laughter and dreams. The dream he had thought was dead had not died at all. It had merely been waiting for a little girl with a crayon to draw him a new reality, a reality where the lonely dragon was finally, joyfully, found.